Okay, so today we're going deep on PLA filament.
PLA.
And this is especially for anyone just getting into 3D printing.
Right.
You probably see it's like the most common filament that you see.
Yeah, the most popular.
The most popular one. Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to dig into this excerpt we have here.
Yeah.
All about PLA filament.
Sounds good.
And yeah, I think it's a good one to really understand because, like I said, if you're getting into 3D printing, you're gonna see it everywhere. So,
yeah, you're gonna run into it immediately, basically.
Yeah.
That's the first filament you're probably gonna buy.
Exactly.
It's kind of the default for a lot of printers, even.
So PLA stands for polylactic acid.
Right.
And
which is a mouthful.
Which is a mouthful, yeah. And I always have to look that up every time I say it.
Me too.
But basically, it's made from renewable resources like cornstarch or sugarcane.
Yeah, and that's what makes it really interesting and why everyone's always talking about it being biodegradable. But, you know, there is kind of a catch to that.
So it's not like as simple as just saying like, oh, it's biodegradable and,
right.
and just like throwing it in your compost.
Yeah, it needs very specific conditions to actually break down.
Okay.
Like high heat and moisture. So it's not like you can just chuck it in your backyard compost and expect it to disappear.
Gotcha.
But it is a lot better than your traditional plastics.
Right.
You know, those can take hundreds of years to decompose, and PLA is, you know, much faster.
Under the right conditions.
Exactly. So it's better, but you gotta be aware of those limitations.
Okay, so besides it being, you know, from renewable resources and biodegradable, what makes it so good for beginners?
So there are a couple of reasons PLA is really popular among beginners.
Okay.
One of the biggest ones is that it has a really low warping tendency.
Okay.
So warping is like when your print warps.
Right.
It starts to kind of lift up from the print bed as it cools, and it just gets all messed up, basically.
So it doesn't stick.
Right. It doesn't stick properly, and it's just a nightmare for beginners.
Yeah.
Because you're already fiddling with all these settings, trying to figure out how to print.
Right.
And then you get warping, and it's just like...
Add another layer of...
Another thing to worry about, exactly.
Okay.
But PLA, because it doesn't shrink as much when it cools, it's less prone to warping.
Gotcha.
So you're going to have a smoother experience, you know, less failed prints, which is great when you're just starting out.
Right. So low warping check.
Yeah.
Plus being, you know, good for the environment, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Check. But now I want to get to the fun stuff.
Oh, okay.
Colors and finishes.
Yeah.
Does PLA have a lot to offer in that department?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
PLA comes in like a ridiculous amount of colors.
Okay.
You can find pretty much any color you can imagine. And a bunch of really cool finishes, too. Like there's glow-in-the-dark PLA,
Okay.
wood-filled PLA, so you can get prints that look like they're made of wood.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There's silk PLA, which gives you this really beautiful glossy finish.
Okay.
So yeah, you can really let your imagination run wild with all the options.
So there's a lot of creative potential there.
For sure.
All right. So no material's perfect, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the downsides of PLA?
Yeah, of course. So PLA does have some limitations.
Okay.
One thing to keep in mind is that it's relatively brittle
Okay.
compared to other filaments. It's not super flexible, and it can crack under stress.
Gotcha.
So like you wouldn't want to print a phone case out of PLA.
Right.
Because if you drop your phone, it could crack.
Right.
But it's great for things like decorative items or prototypes where flexibility isn't super important.
Okay. So maybe not a phone case.
Yeah.
What about something like a coffee cup handle? I imagine with the heat, it wouldn't hold up too well.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Okay.
PLA has a fairly low heat resistance.
Okay.
It starts to soften around 50 to 60 degrees Celsius.
Gotcha.
So anything that's going to be exposed to high heat, like a coffee cup handle or anything like that, it's probably not the best choice.
Got it.
But you could still use it to prototype something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So you could print out a prototype of your coffee cup handle, see how it looks and feels in your hand.
Yeah.
And then once you're happy with the design, you can use a different material that's more heat resistant for the final product.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's a good prototyping material.
Absolutely.
So we talked about how it's good for like decorative items, prototypes, stuff like that. What about these specialty PLAs you were talking about? What are those all about?
Right. So there are a bunch of specialty PLAs out there.
Okay.
That are basically modifications of regular TLA
Okay.
to give it different properties.
Gotcha.
So you mentioned PLA plus.
Yeah.
That's like PLA's stronger, more durable cousin.
Okay.
It can handle a bit more stress than regular PLA, and it's also a little bit more flexible.
Okay.
And then you have the wood and metal filled PLAs,
Right.
which are really cool because they give you this unique texture and finish.
Yeah.
So like with wood filled PLA, you can print something that looks and feels like it's made out of wood.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So there's a lot of potential there for different,
Yeah.
types of projects and stuff.
Definitely.
Cool. All right, so for those of us who are listening who are ready to get started with PLA, do you have any tips for printing with it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So one of the most common issues people run into with PLA is getting it to stick to the print bed.
Okay.
That first layer adhesion is super important.
Right.
And PLA can be a little bit finicky sometimes.
Okay.
So a couple of things that work really well are using painter's tape
Okay.
or a glue stick.
Glue stick.
Yeah, just regular glue stick.
Okay.
Those provide just the right amount of grip to help that first layer stick.
Okay, and that's just on the print bed itself.
Yep, just on the print bed.
Okay.
And then another important tip is to keep your PLA dry.
Okay.
Moisture is PLA's kryptonite.
Gotcha.
It absorbs moisture from the air, and that can cause all sorts of problems with your prints. Like what?
You might get stringing,
Oh, yeah.
which is like these little wispy bits of plastic that are left behind.
Right?
Your prints might be weaker.
Okay.
So it's really important to store your PLA properly.
So how do you store it?
So the best way to store it is in an airtight container
Okay.
with some desiccant packs.
Okay. The second packs be
Those little silica gel packets that you find in shoe boxes and stuff.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, those absorb the moisture from the air and help keep your filament nice and dry.
Okay, so airtight container desiccant packs.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And you should be good to go.
Awesome. All right, so I think we've covered a lot about PLA.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a really good material to start with, as a beginner.
It is.
It's ego-conscious, relatively speaking.
Right.
Yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, for sure.
And then as you get more advanced, you can kind of move on to some of these other specialty PLAs.
Right, exactly. And, with all the advancements that are happening in material science.
Who knows what kinds of amazing PLAs they're going to come up with in the future.
Right.
So it's a really exciting time to be into 3D printing.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for going deep on PLA filament with me.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
And, yeah, we'll see everybody next time
See ya.
for another deep dive.
Bye.
Bye.